Hello! You find me knee-deep in a snowbank because I'm Canadian. And my home is under threat by that landmass over there. That's America. And they've got some wacky ideas coming out of there lately, making enemies of allies around the world and allies of enemies. As a result of this, Canadians have taken it personally, creating a movement known as Buy Canada, which is literally what it says on the tin because we're quite a literal people. What we're doing is avoiding everything American. We're literally letting them rot. Their foodstuffs on our shelves, and frankly, their attitude towards us. We're letting it rot. That is now our X. This is a guitar channel. What the hell does that have to do with anything? Put simply, it's difficult to buy Canadian. Snapped into a snowbank again. It's difficult to buy Canadian for certain things. Letting lettuce rot is easy, but how do we do this with guitar? And how do we do it ethically is a bigger question. I'm part of the problem as well. All of my amp stuff is American. And then pedals-wise, the majority of these are American, a couple Japanese, and the tuner is Danish. But it's mostly American. Even guitar-wise, most of these are American brands, except for the Yamaha, the Chapman, which is British, and the one bit of Canadian gear that I have. This Lark, which was made in America. The guitar industry is absolutely overrun with American product. All of our great bands, which we have a lot of, played American instruments. Fender, Gibson, PRS, all of it, American stuff, used by Canadians to make greatness. But would you believe me when I say Canada makes a lot of shit? We make a lot of guitar stuff. We're massive makers of things. You just don't know about it. So what do Canadians make? How do we find that? Well, there is a website on screen, fuck it, Ehfects.ca. And what that site is an aggregate of every Canadian manufacturer of guitar gear stuff. And I reached out to the guy who runs it, a guy named Kevin, and I asked him a couple simple questions to try and figure out how to buy Canadian and where to buy Canadian. What are some things that Canada doesn't make? There seems to be a little bit of everything. Maybe there's a little less of the high-end stuff, high-end digital effect stuff, but we do still see stuff like the Empress Echo system and the Zoya and stuff like that. He said some items he's looked for from Canadian companies and haven't found are a really good Leslie speaker sim, which kind of makes sense because A, there's not really a good Leslie sim, period, and B, I'm guessing that we have different Roush compliancy things, like you're not going to find a great Univibe in Canada either. And we don't really have programmable loop switchers. But also, he said, those are the most sought after items. Now things that I struggled to find were power supplies. I don't know any Canadian company that makes a power supply. And it took me a long time to find a Canadian company that makes strings. Godin does, but only 3 gauges of electric strings. Do you have any advice or insight for Canadian gear makers who would like to increase their visibility, which I think is super important right now? If you are a Canadian builder, put yourself out there right now. Right now, there are over 300 builders listed on Ehfects. 300 Canadian builders. A lot of them barely have any internet or social media presence at all. Even if you don't want to actively use social media, Kevin here is saying, I'd still suggest having a profile with a few pictures of your offerings and your contact info. And also make sure to send, if you are a builder and you're not up on Ehfects, hit up Kevin. It's like, send it to him. Let's build this thing out. That last point I can't agree with more. Canadians are terrible at social media, most of us. And I think there's a couple good reasons for that. One being, of course, we don't have incentive to. Nobody pays you for social media. It's not a thing. And frankly, it's because most Canadian builders are incredibly small. And it's likely a hobby job or something to that effect. There are very few large companies, but there are 300 that we know of. And if you're one person, to try and be present on the internet, to become a filmographer and an editor, all of that is work, all of that is time, and for most people, it's not enjoyable. But importantly in that is Canadian makers are small. We're small business, incredibly so. And as such, any support to them is a massive expanse for people who make things in Canada. On the other side of that though, small is the case with guitar gear everywhere, even America. And this gets into the ethics of things. Because if you're a Canadian who's been lusting after, say, a Castadosa, epic guitars, super expensive, but you finally are able to justify the purchase of that. However, by whatever means possible, selling, no, not gonna make that joke, but whatever means possible, you've made it. You can afford that instrument. But now you kind of wanna stay in Canada. Thing is, you're hurting two people if you don't buy a Castadosa. Carlos Lopez, his wife, who makes the pickups, and I'm sorry, I don't remember your name off the top of my head, I should have looked it up. I like Mythos pedals. If I intentionally didn't buy a Mythos pedal, I'm hurting 3 people and their families. That's it. JHS is a massive pedal company. They have maybe 50 people working there, and a half dozen of them are just on the YouTube channel. Back to the social media is difficult. And this is the ethics of it. Because it is nothing to just not buy Coca-Cola, to not use Amazon, to not watch a Disney movie, to not invest any time or energy or money into major American conglomerate companies. It's easy to not eat a Big Mac. It's incredibly easy to do that. It's difficult to not buy guitar hardware or pots, guitar strings and picks from the bigger American guitar companies. That's much harder. That takes actual dedication to do. So I'm gonna run down what I think is the ethical way to actually buy Canadian in guitar gear. These are in no particular order, but I'm gonna run them down as a list. First thing I would say, there are 7 companies to avoid. These are major companies and they make a lot of stuff, but you can avoid them. Fender Musical Company, Gibson, Paul Reed Smith, Martin, Ernie Ball Music Man, Dunlop, and probably D'Addario. Those are the big companies. There's no other big companies. Those are the only ones that if you avoided, you could actually hurt the US economy in a more potent way than hurting American people. It damages a corporation. There's a few things there that are difficult in the avoidance though. Ernie Ball Music Man, D'Addario, and Dunlop. Those are your strings, your picks, your consumables. Those are hard to replace. There are pick companies in Canada. There is a string company in Canada. There are string companies in Germany, and notably Rotosound out of the UK. And I'm bringing up strings a lot because the tariff on steel, when there is a compounding tariff on Canada, 30% of manufactured steel in America comes from Canada. Your guitar strings are going to cost more. They're going to have to jack up the price on all this stuff. Number 2, buy used. Obviously buy used. If you're someone who's heard me say don't buy a Fender and you're like, someone who only a Gibson is a Gibson, only a Fender is a Fender, and you have to have that name on that shape. If you can afford a US standard, odds are you can find a great used one and possibly even a used custom shop at that price. Now, if you're buying it because you can finance a new thing, look, we're all in debt. Maybe take out a petty loan and pay that as if you would pay financing. That's terrible advice. Avoid new from any of the 7 I've mentioned. Number 3, don't buy direct. If you have to buy American stuff, buy it through a Canadian retailer. There are dealers all over the place for a lot of this stuff. You want a Novo? Lazon Music in Ottawa sells them. You can buy them there. You can order them there. You don't need to buy direct. Now, stuff like Chase Bliss, which is direct, bit of a different situation, I would say maybe hold off on that. Or again, buy used. Maybe not with Chase Bliss, because they just mark up the value on those a lot used for no reason. Number 4, and this is a big one that's coming out recently. The way to really hurt the US government and economy and what they're trying to pull here is through services. And by services, I mean internet services, apps, websites, things of that nature. As much as this probably hurts a lot of people, don't use reverb, especially the app. Maybe the website you can get away with it, but don't. Think about that internet search stuff, because that's something that we're fundamentally being screwed over on, and something we can fundamentally quickly do serious middle finger ass damage by just avoiding services. So don't use reverb. Obviously, don't use Amazon. Don't use it at all for anything, let alone music stuff, because most of the music stuff they sell is crap. These things are hard. It's hard times. It's going to be difficult to figure things out. Definitely going to be difficult to figure out the ethics of things. This video has taken me weeks of thinking just to try and address the ethics of things. And in those weeks, my personal and frankly Canada's rage and want to reject everything American outright has ratcheted up immensely. But that's not the thing. We're pissed at America, not Americans. The only thing I'm angry about with Americans is that don't think you're mad enough. Shit like this requires courage. We all need to step up.